When you stop and take a look at the Jets' crop of undrafted free agents they added after their weekend out in Green Bay this year, a little pattern emerges that's pretty obvious, but not surprising at all, with Aaron Glenn being the team's head coach. I'm Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log into JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. So we talked a little bit about these UDFAs immediately after the draft. Some of these guys, the smaller school guys, I hadn't really had a chance to watch, so I've now had an opportunity to do that. And I don't know if it's just my imagination. You guys can let me know if I'm crazy on this one or not. But I feel like this year's class is a little bit tougher to kind of go through and pick a few guys who are sort of, I don't know, that I feel really good about making it. And that's not to say there are none, because there are a few, but then there are a handful of guys where I don't know what to do with in terms of thinking ahead. So let's just go down the list of UDFAs that they've added, and this one's a quick one tonight. We're going to start doing some we'll do the hour-long shows on Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, but throughout the week throw up a couple of shorter ones so I'm not so long-winded and yappy and putting you guys to sleep. So Brady Cook, the quarterback out of Mizzou, who, if you've been listening to me for any length of time, or over the past year or so, I've mentioned Cook quite a bit. I've been tweeting about him. I've been starting threads on JetNation.com saying, look, it's time that we talk about Brady Cook as an option at quarterback. I thought he was worth a day 3 pick. I think if he had entered the draft last year, he would have been a lock to go on day 3. This year, the numbers weren't quite the same. The production wasn't the same. The film didn't look as good because he was playing a little bit dinged up, but nothing major. So, you don't expect him to have any issues moving forward. So you bring in Brady Cook, a guy who, again, should have been a day 3 pick. I've been touting him for a while because of the fact that, he played elite competition. He played at a high level. He won some really big games against some good teams, lost some games against some good teams, and played really well himself. Very athletic, doesn't have the strongest arm, but he does put good touch on the ball, can throw well on the run. He just does a lot of things well that I like. And the example, that I've given a couple times as a reminder for those of you who missed it, when we had Emery Hunt on, he said he kind of had Brady Cook, and this is pre-draft. This is when I was asking Emery about Brady Cook because I knew he was a fan, and I wanted Jets fans to get familiar with him. Just said how he thought he was, almost his comp was Andy Dalton from back, again, Dalton college days, not Dalton as a pro. And, we can laugh all we want about Andy Dalton, but let's be honest, he would have been the best quarterback the Jets have had in the lifetime of probably anybody listening to this show. So you bring in Brady Cook. Now, his chances to make the roster, I really like his chances, especially with the Jordan Travis retirement. Cook has an opportunity to slide in there and win a job. The question will be, how many quarterbacks do the Jets plan on keeping? Now, if I'm the Jets, I keep 3 because in Tyrod Taylor, you've got a guy who's had way too many injuries to rely on him for anything more than a handful of games. So I would keep Cook, but again, we don't know how they're going to manage those roster spots. The UDFAs at receiver are, again, I'm intrigued by Quinton Skinner. I've said many times how I'm pretty familiar with a lot of guys on that Kansas roster because I became a big fan of their quarterback, Jalen Daniels, a couple of years ago. And in watching so much of him, you get familiar with the skill players. They've got a lot of good players there, and Skinner was one of them. 6'4", 6'5", can win jump balls, makes big plays down the field. Career yards per catch is, I think his best year was over 19 per catch. So Quenton Skinner is a guy who can make big plays down the field as a big target. Could he be the Lazard role? He's got better hands than Lazard, but maybe not as strong at the line, beating the jam and things like that. So, he's a guy who's going to need some coaching, but I could see him making it. Jamal Pritchett, love his explosiveness, quickness. The size worries me a little bit, so I would paint him as an unlikely, maybe a practice squad type. Donovan Edwards, the running back out of Michigan. Listen, a few years ago, this guy, and I've talked about this before, I said it when the Jets signed him, he was looking like he was going to be a top 50 pick a couple of years ago with Michigan. Was one of the most explosive, productive backs in the country, 7+ yards per carry. I believe it was 7.3, if I'm not mistaken. So Donovan Edwards is a guy who absolutely 2 years ago, people would have said this guy, forget undrafted, and forget just getting drafted. He was going to be one of the best backs in the class. And we kind of laughed about how he was on the NCAA football, he was one of the cover boys. That's how highly touted he was, and he just didn't have the production this year that many expected. But a guy who can push for a roster spot, Isaiah Davis, yeah, the Jets like him. He did some nice things last year, but this regime didn't draft him. And if they bring a guy in that looks even a little bit better, well, guess what? They're going to keep that guy. Gus Hartwig, the interior lineman from Purdue, does a really nice job picking up stunts and twists. Tough guy in the middle of the O-line. This comes down to how we feel about the Jets O-line, the depth behind the starters. I feel like Xavier Newman improved a lot last year. I like Kolovau a fair bit. I thought he deserved to make the roster last year. Of course, he didn't. So Hartwig will be given a chance to compete with these guys. He's played a ton of football. He's played well. So I think that he's not, again, not a guy I would write off, but I would say probably practice squad material. But again, wouldn't shock me if he beat one of those interior guys for a spot. Leander Weigand, not a lot to say. I haven't seen him play, right? What did I think a year at UCF, but never played. So there's no film on him. Don't have any European Football League film to watch him, but he's a guy clearly the Jets like. They paid him a couple $100,000 to come in, and he will qualify for the International Player Pathway program. So basically, if the Jets like him, they can keep him on the practice squad as a guy who won't count against the practice squad numbers. So he's a guy, at the very least, he probably sticks around in that capacity in the international pathway, and they try to develop him. For Torma Malba. So this is a guy out of West Virginia who I think has the best shot to stick on the roster. This Jets team cannot stop the run. And Malba, as I said, when the Jets signed him, he's not the 340-pounder I was hoping for. It's not Jamari Caldwell. It's not Deion Walker, somebody along those lines. But you know what? Even at 305, you watch him on film, he does a really nice job against the run. He holds up well at the point. Very athletic for a guy who plays on the interior, and will have every chance in the world to make this roster because this group of defensive tackles outside of Quinton Williams is not very impressive. Leonard Taylor, second-year undrafted free agent, might be the second best guy in this DT group, but not renowned for his ability to stop the run, which was a weakness for this team last year. So I think Malba has as good a shot as any among these free agents to make the roster. Jammarcus Weston, he's listed as an edge, of course, from Florida. Brought in, again, a guy, if I'm not mistaken, they paid him a couple $100,000 just to come in, just to play specials. So what that tells me is this guy has a roster spot unless he does something. It's his spot to lose. Let's put it that way. And again, this is me guessing. You tell me you're paying a couple $100,000 to bring in a guy who only plays special teams and he's not a kicker or a punter, then I believe you really love what he does and what he brings. And if that's the case, then again, I think the roster spot is his to lose. Then we get down to the last few here, the last handful. And this is where I noticed, and again, you kind of expect it with Aaron Glenn. Versatility seemed to be a big key here. And we know Aaron Glenn likes to move people around and be able to be multiple on defense without having to swap personnel. If he can get certain guys to do multiple different things and keep teams guessing, that's right up his alley. So you look at this group of guys at the bottom here. Linebacker Jared Bartlett. So here's a guy who played at Cincinnati, transferred, I believe, from West Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. But he's got experience. He played defensive end for West Virginia, went to Cincinnati where they moved him to linebacker. So edge, defensive end, whatever you want to call it. They had him on the D-line, playing outside. Then he moves to linebacker. So he's got a ton of reps at both spots and could be a guy who plays a little bit of both as a pro. I would imagine the Jets, I think what he showed at edge, I think was pretty impressive, and the Jets may try to cultivate that and continue developing him there with him as an option, as a guy who could fill in a pinch and play a little bit of linebacker. But I think his versatility gives him a shot to make this roster. And that's, you don't see teams keep a ton of UDFAs. But I think with this group, we could see 4 or 5 guys stick around. Why is that? Well, because then you look at the next linebacker, Aaron Smith. So this is a guy out of South Carolina State, guy I wasn't very familiar with or wasn't familiar with at all because, again, small enough school that I hadn't watched any of their games pre-draft. read up on him a little bit on the football game plan Emory Hunt draft guide, and he had Smith listed as an athletic linebacker who was able to cover backs and tight ends. I watched 3 of his games. I came away thinking the athleticism is obvious. Does a really nice job of diagnosing. He's always around the ball, finds himself in the right place. Does a good job of evading blockers, keeping blockers' hands off of him so he can get himself freed up to make plays and get after the ball carrier. So not an elite 40 time, but he plays fast. I think he's a guy, again, because of the versatility. The thing that jumped out to me was the snap counts. Took a look at him. I mean, I took a look at all these guys to check just how much they got moved around by their previous teams, by their college teams. And this is a guy who, and again, at South Carolina State, played 452 snaps at linebacker. And this is last year, I believe. And not the most recent, but 2023. And 87 snaps in the slot. Like, look, you see linebackers line up in the slot sometimes, but it might be 12, 15, 20 times a year where it's, once or twice a game and it's just a matchup dictated thing. You play 87 snaps in the slot. That's just not by chance. Clearly they felt he could cover these guys, and his coverage on film, the coverage looked pretty good. Couldn't find any all 22, so it's a little bit tougher. But from what I could see on the TV angle, the regular game angle, he looked like a solid player. And again, a versatile guy who did do a nice job covering backs and tight ends. I think I only saw him really get beat on one bad pass play in the 3 games I watched. So I think he's a guy you could develop and who could do a few different things for you. And again, you can imagine Aaron Glenn wants guys who can fill a variety of roles. And that brings us to another guy, Jordan Clark, the corner out of Notre Dame, son of Ryan Clark. Jets reportedly signed him to a 3-year deal as an undrafted free agent, and doesn't have a ton of versatility, but played really well on the slot and did a nice job at safety as well. Played some on the boundary. I'm not sold on that being something he could do well as a pro, but have to watch more of him. But again, he does have that little bit of that slot safety versatility, and I'm sure they love the bloodlines with him being, again, the son of a former NFL DB. The most versatile guy in the group, though, who you look at and think if versatility is something they're seeking out, this is a guy who probably makes your roster, and that's Dean Clark out of Fresno State. Or I should say, has a good shot to make your roster. Dean Clark out of Fresno State played 410 snaps last year at free safety, played another 264 down in the box on defense, and then 105 in the slot. So Fresno State had a lot of confidence in this kid's ability to do a lot of different things. And if the Jets feel the same way, if they feel like he's a guy who brings a lot in multiple different positions, then he's got a really good shot to make this team. So again, I'm not going to sit here and say these guys are locks to make it, but let's throw out 5 names. If I'm going to throw out 5 names of guys, if I had to bet money and you say, Glenn, find us 5 guys who are going to stick, I'm going to say Brady Cook, Torma Malba, Jared Bartlett, and I'll tell you what, I'm having a tough time. Dean Clark, love the versatility there. Jordan Clark, I think it can be a really good slot. I know they have a slot, but you wouldn't mind having a guy who can play at the level he can in that position. Kind of painting myself in a corner here, limiting myself to 5 because I like these guys. And that's what's making it tough. I feel like I'm having to pick between Jordan Clark or Dean Clark. But given the Jets' lack of depth at safety, lack of proven depth, I could see both these guys finding a way to stick. And I'll throw in a 6th. I'll throw in Quenton Skinner with the caveat. I got to be completely honest here. Dymere Miller is a guy I've watched less of him than I have anyone else. I've only had a chance to watch a game and a half of him, so I'd like to watch a couple more before I say what I feel about him. But that's kind of where I'm at with this group, and I'm admitting most years I'll pick 4 or 5 guys, and I feel pretty confident that I'll get a few right. And I guess again, I feel really good about Malba. I feel good about Bartlett, the versatility. I feel good about Cook. So there are some guys I feel good with saying they have a chance to make this roster as UDFAs. Real quick in the chat, and then we'll wrap this one up. Like I said, we're going to start doing some shorter abbreviated stuff throughout the week with a long show in the middle. Thomas says he was disappointed the Jets didn't draft an interior offensive lineman, but happy they took the guard from Germany who brings strength to the roster as a backup. Yeah, I mean, who knows how far away he is from being a backup. As I said, I don't know if you caught it, Thomas. He right now qualifies for the international pathway program, which means the Jets can put him on the practice squad, and he does not count against the practice squad. Obviously, doesn't count against the 53, but doesn't even count against your practice squad. So he's a guy. This is basically the NFL trying to grow the game, add international players, and make it, encourage teams to keep guys around who maybe otherwise wouldn't have made their practice squad. So I think that's where he lands. But again, if we're talking about interior lineman, Gus Hartwig, as I said, a guy who played for Purdue, has played a lot of football, and is going to be competing for a spot with a lot of guys who haven't played a ton at the pro level. So, which is often the case with your backup lineman. So that's it. That'll wrap up our quick look at the UDFA class. And just wanted to touch on that trend, as I said, as I'm going through these names and I'm looking at the snap counts and I'm thinking versatility. There's a versatile guy. Here's another versatile guy. This guy played linebacker and edge. This guy played safety and corner and slot. So a lot of versatile chess pieces here for Aaron Glenn to play with and see who he likes, who he doesn't, who stays, who goes. That's the stuff we'll know in the coming months. But as for now, we'll continue watching these guys, watching any additions the Jets make between now and the start of the season. That'll wrap this one up. We'll be back in a couple of days. We're going to have Scott Mitchell from JetNation is going to be joining me to talk a little bit about the draft class itself. If you checked out JetNation during the draft, Scott Mitchell did all of our player write-ups while I was doing the live broadcast. So big shout out to him for that. And we're going to have him on Thursday night, to talk about some of these players and some more goings on. We're going to touch on, I know I said I was going to do a thing with the free agents and go over the best remaining guys that the Jets might target. There are no best remaining guys. I mean, my focus was going to be at DT, and I've gone through that list and I've watched some of these guys on film. You got what you got, guys. Listen, this is why I think Malba has a shot to stick, because there's not much out there and he looks like he might be a player. Have a good one, Jets fans.